You're watching WION World is One News. I'm Krishna Kumar. We're now being joined by Reham Khan, author and journalist, live from London. Reham, thank you so much for taking time out. Gulalai Ismail, Pakistan's leading human rights activist, was harassed by Pakistani authorities. Interim bail, and she's the latest to be harassed by the country's authorities. How dangerous is the environment for free speech in the country? Some say it's the worst it has been since the days of dictatorship a decade ago. Would you agree?
Thank you, Krishna. Absolutely. I would go further than that. And I would say that because I'm a child of the Zia era, and of course we talked about military dictatorship and we talked about the lack of freedom of speech, and we had protests, street protests, as well as a lot of political parties, particularly the Pakistan People's Party, protesting against the Hudud ordinance, and we had leading names and faces at the time. But I have spoken to people who were journalists at the time, and they say that this is much worse, far worse than it was in the Zia era. So this is naked dictatorship. It's the democracy, the guise of democracy that they're using isn't fooling anyone. And I think with Gulalai Ismail and women like her, and individuals like her, there has been a designed campaign of hate. It's obviously very easy to direct hate and cyberbullying towards a woman in our society. And this has been going on. I've been watching how they have been targeting Gulalai Ismail for the past year and a half, actually, for her activities. And this is pre-Pashtun Tahaffuz movement, the PTM campaign. I know this young girl from the days when she started her Seeds of Peace movement, which is basically a campaign to protect women, particularly young women who are forced into marriages, say, for example, child marriages or jirga decisions are given against them. And I remember interviewing her back in 2015 as one of the unsung heroes of Pakistan. And I remember at the time also, it wasn't my opinion about her and my how I hold her in high esteem wasn't shared. So this is very sad. I think an environment has been created, and arrests like this, which are high profile, are designed to create an environment of fear and make it understood to everyone that if you speak against any kind of curtailment of freedom of speech, if you talk about it internationally, you will have to pay the price.
Right. Reham, you know, Pakistan is not known to arrest its journalists very often, so to speak, but we have seen a spate of abductions, like activist Reza Khan, who has been missing since December last year. We have journalist and activist Gul Bukhari, who was abducted in June this year. Do you think that the Pakistani establishment, that is the military and the intelligence, are the ones behind these attacks?
Well, you see, all the people I've spoken to who have been picked up and abducted, in the past, they've always been people we've, of course, as personally as well, I've been campaigning for missing persons, be it Baloch missing activists or Sindhi missing social activists and campaigners. And we've seen people who were not very well known being picked up. So, of course, they didn't create media highlights. And of course, the media didn't really, at least the social media, didn't know about them. But recently, a spate of very high-profile abductions and high-profile disappearances have really shocked us. For example, Gul Bukhari is a British national, and that is unheard of. I think many people feel that having a British nationality or a British passport will keep them safer. But of course, now we see it very clearly that nothing is going to protect you if you target the military. Gul Bukhari and Reza were very vocal and still are, at least Gul Bukhari is very vocal in her criticism of the military establishment and also of the judicial, the recent changes in the judicial system and the decisions. And I think it's just shocking. It's beyond shocking. Of course, Cyril Almeida, what is his crime? To be picking up people, putting them on the exit control list. For what? There doesn't seem to be an argument about why their names have been put on exit control list. And of course, the Pashtun Tahaffuz movement, boy,
at this stage, right, Reham, I hate to interrupt you, but the case of journalist Cyril Almeida that you were just referring to, he writes for one of the most famous Pakistani publications, Dawn News. His case just came up at the court. It's a highly sensitive issue in Pakistan because his story was on how a former Pakistani Prime Minister knew that the 2008 Mumbai attack terrorists were being bred in Pakistan. It created a huge uproar. how does the Pakistani public view the Cyril Almeida case?
I think the Pakistani public is you see, we have been celebrating the rise and the surge of electronic media for the last 10, 11 years. And even while I was working in media, I noticed that it wasn't really something to celebrate because there were very clear indications of what to report on and what to be self-censoring. It wasn't as bad as we've seen this past year, and certainly since Dawn leaks back in October 2016, it's been just a regression. It's been a decline in freedoms. I cannot understand under what law would they hold any journalist or an editorial level journalist like Cyril Almeida for reporting on something. What has he reported on that has not been discussed in the press before? And I cannot understand how that falls under treason. So this is outrageous, unacceptable. I think we cannot condemn it enough to be targeting journalists just because they're reporting or just because they're interviewing former prime ministers or prime ministers at the time.
Right.
And this is just, I think, to create an environment where there is, of course, terrorism on the streets with bombs and suicidal attacks. But I think this is a terrorism of a different kind where this fear and terror is created in the minds of the general public. And of course, the way the electronic media works in Pakistan is that the way they present the news, people can be forgiven for thinking that this is actually factual. So a lot of people are made to believe that Reham Khan is a raw agent or an MI6 agent, and they've done it to all of us. I think that increasingly we have to unite and take a stand. Back in 2015, they accused me of being an MI6 agent, and then I returned to Pakistan and I said, well, I'm here. If that is the case, arrest me now, take me to the courts. It is completely unacceptable for national media to sit on prime time and accuse people. And there isn't any law that you can sort of hold them accountable. There isn't any sort of defamation law which is strong enough to take them to court and hold them accountable. They say what they're told to say, and they say it with impunity. And of course, with Cyril Almeida, he belongs to a minority group as well, and I fear for the sort of propaganda against him, because innocent masses can be made to believe that he is a traitor, and this has been done in the past very, very successfully.
Right. Reham, all these attacks and abductions that we're talking about, it's been happening over the last couple of years, as you've been telling us. In the last couple of months, the regime has changed in Pakistan. We have a new prime minister, a new regime. Do you think that things have become worse? The new prime minister is supposedly acting on the orders of the Pakistani military, because anybody who dares criticize the army seems to be vanishing mysteriously or harassed by authorities, again, mysteriously.
Well, you see, I've said it before, and now it's slowly, I got a lot of criticism for speaking out, and people have always said that I'm perhaps biased and have some sort of personal vendetta. But now other people are seeing, and actually the sales of my book have gone up since all of these misdemeanors and these acrobatics, because people are now questioning. The economy is crashing, and the Prime Minister is talking about building toilets. Today, when we have such a huge issue where, a lot of social activists, certainly Gulalai Ismail, but also an 88-year-old gentleman who's been picked up just because he was on the stage in the Swabi PTM protest, and the gentleman is talking about the clean and green campaign. I mean, there has to be some sort of priority, but I think that the poor guy doesn't really have any authority to talk about anything but toilets. So when I say that he is the ideal puppet, I say that with authority. I say that he is perfectly cut out to do the business, because as you can see, everything is, this is not democracy by any standards. And certainly when you crack down, this is looking like North Korea. This is looking much worse than the Zia era. I cannot stress this enough. We have not had people's passports being taken away and their names put on exit control lists for no reason at all. And the Prime Minister, of course, seems to be very busy with his toilet campaign. He has not said one word about it. And can you blame him? Of course not, because he's compromised before he came into office. That was the understanding, and that is how it's going to be.
Right. And Reham, as you rightly brought up the issue of economics, Pakistan has knocked on the International Monetary Fund's doors for the biggest bailout package in history to deal with the crisis. Do you think this and the kind of attention about what's happening to journalists and activists in Pakistan, the kind of attention that it's going to receive from the international community will derail that bailout package from in the International Monetary Fund? The world is watching, Reham. Even the US is talking tough on its ally Saudi Arabia for the disappearance of Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi. If Saudi can warrant sanctions for that, then why not Pakistan?
Well, I think that, I feel that this has been designed. Look at the world map now. We have a crackdown in the US as well over freedom of speech. And so there is restricting freedoms across the board. And this is very worrying for somebody like myself who's campaigned for freedom and indeed has lived a life which has defied any constraints on personal or public freedoms. And here I think that the economy is, or the fact that we are grey listed, and I see no chance of us being our status reinstated. In fact, I think we're heading towards being blacklisted with the way we're behaving. So I don't really think that there's anyone in the government or these so-called elected representatives who are serious about reducing or even minimizing the image of extremism, the image of human rights being curtailed. I think that we're working towards actually magnifying the image that we are indeed an intolerant people and we are indeed an intolerant state. And this isn't going to go down well with anyone that we are expecting funds or any sort of development help from. The IMF has been very clear about it. And what I personally understand is that actually the rupee is going to crash further. Those are the terms that the IMF will set down. I think they've made it very clear that they have certain requirements that Pakistan must fulfill before they even consider a loan. And one of them will be, of course, the fact that the rupee will crash down to 145 to the dollar and maybe even 155. And that's not something that the middle class or the general public can afford to deal with. We are a nation that is struggling with poverty. We're a nation that's struggling with joblessness. We are a nation that's struggling with violence and extremism and even militancy because of poverty. And so this is just madness. And I think that not only the middle class and the masses are going to suffer and are already suffering, but I think that this political party, Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf, is going to suffer horribly because I think that they have exposed themselves like no one else could. They have exposed their compromises, they've exposed their incompetencies, and they've exposed the lack of urgency. There is no will. We've talked about political will, but I mean, this is just madness, what they're doing. The IMF is going to crack down heavily on them. And they've been very clear about the fact that they're not going to give them money to bail them out because the country is actually under heavy loans from China. So I think that there isn't any plan, and there doesn't seem to be any urgency to devise a plan either.
Reham, I have to ask you this. Pakistan's foreign minister, Mr. Shah Mahmood Qureshi, says that Pakistan's media freedom is parallel to that of any first world country. And even the military's ISPR claims that they don't interfere with the media.
Well, I can tell you, let's come back full circle to Gulalai Ismail. I know for a fact that right now there are people like me or somebody in the Pashtun Tahaffuz movement. You see, I know these people personally. We are social activists who have been working on the ground since 2014 together. Mohsin Davar and I, the leading member in Pashtun Tahaffuz movement, I've seen him working for the IDPs, the internally displaced persons, following the Zarb-e-Azab operation in Banu. I didn't see any politician working for that. I didn't see anyone from the army working for that. We were delivering water. We were delivering relief as just individuals. And that's how I bumped across these people and found them to be very, very conscientious. And they just wanted to provide for the welfare and the well-being of these displaced persons. And I have seen designed campaigns against them. Social media activists, young boys, are given a start-up pays of about 35,000, 45,000 rupees just to be abusing people like Gulalai Ismail. I have seen that. I know that those accounts who have been swearing at this woman, who have been cyberbullying this woman, calling her a traitor, calling for violence against her, long before the Pashtun Tahaffuz movement started, only because of a stance on women's rights, they have been acknowledged and praised by the ISPR official tweets. So what is the connection here? Please explain to me. If someone is, for example, if I find someone in my team who is abusing a certain social activist, I tell them very clearly that please take off the RKF label, do not have any association with me. If you're going to support anything which is against civil liberties, then detach yourself from me, and I will not be retweeting you, and I will not be re-endorsing your campaign. So here there is an environment where lots of social media activists are being encouraged and paid. And you and I cannot pay individual people to build social media accounts like that. So it's of course the connections, when people connect the dots, it's not fooling anyone.
Reham, the questions are on the Pakistani establishment and what they have to do with all these cases of attacks and abductions and disappearances of journalists. And you're talking specifically about social media. Is there a planned campaign from the Pakistani establishment to track the activities of journalists and human rights activists on social media? And in a sense, this is orchestrated from the civilian elected government to the real establishment, that's the military and the intelligence. It's their men who make sure that anybody who chooses to speak against the establishment is harassed one way or the other. And then the fear psychosis will eventually mean that nobody will dare to going forward.
Well, I mean, this isn't a hidden fact anymore. You see, it's not just people like me pointing it out. Actually, there have been official tweets from the ISPR naming very, very distinguished and very hardworking journalists like Matiullah Jan, who has a history of standing up for the right side, and for their faces to appear on these. Everyone has seen these tweets, this network of traitors, as it might be, in their mind. These images have been officially tweeted. It's not us just making these things up. These are official responses and pictures of these journalists. So, I mean, it's regretful. I'm not sure who is guiding them. They're not even trying to hide this anymore. So I would love the fact that it was something that I could be proven wrong. But the fact that they're tweeting from official accounts and putting pictures of leading journalists like Matiullah Jan and disciplining other people like Mohsin Davar, for example. He's an elected MNA, for God's sake. And we have the DGISPR directly tweeting to him. What does that mean? So I think that it's not hidden anymore. And it's embarrassing. It's very embarrassing, actually, for me to even accept that. I do double check to think, could it be a fake account? But I think it's become very blatant now. And again, you can't land in Islamabad airport without the fear of your passport being taken off and you being put on the exit control list. What world are we heading towards? And where is the Prime Minister? And where is the Foreign Minister today? I mean, the Foreign Minister speaks several languages and speaks very fluently and beautifully, but I think he needs to have a little bit of content there, because it sounds like he's just mainly just a fluff master.
Right. Reham, the only question that I have left to ask you is what do journalists and activists in Pakistan do now? It's clear, as you're telling us, it's not even secretive anymore. It's very, very out in the open. In an environment like this, what do you think is the next step forward? Because I'm asking this again in the context of the Jamal Khashoggi case in Saudi Arabia. Look at that case and look at the amount of attention it's received. Now the US will have to face it and take action if Saudi Arabia is found fault with. So Pakistan, in that sense, is in the midst of that. It's already in the midst of many other, bilateral and multilateral problems. And this particular case, the Gulalai Ismail case, is something that could trigger, action against Pakistan. In that sense, to make sure that happens, do you think the journalists and activists in Pakistan need to come together to make sure, to let the world know that things are bad, and in fact, it's worse than what the rest of the world thinks?
Well, you see, incidentally, today, as we speak, there is the first conference for Asma Jahangir Sahiba, held to commemorate the way she worked all her life. And I can tell you from experience, from even personal relationships, how hated she was. I use the word hated, despised for the fact that she spoke up. And I think that she was in many ways a lone warrior. I think that people did not appreciate her as much when she was alive. There were a few people who she's inspired, but I think that by and large in Pakistan, she was misunderstood, misrepresented. Again, the label of agent and the label of being a traitor was applied to her, and her stance wasn't really supported like we should have. Well, I have seen the attendance at the conference today, and I think that journalists today, media owners today, need to have maybe develop a spine. I do see that lacking. I think the journalists do not have backing. I think that they need to unite. They need to have a more conjoined effort. And I think just to commemorate the likes of Asma Jahangir, who have spent all their life campaigning for freedoms, it's very important for us to unite. It's now or never, because the space is completely vanishing.
Reham Khan, thank you so much for taking time out to be with us here on WION World is One News.